Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex and I have finally made it to the end of the line. I have finally completed Death's End by Cixin Liu, which is the third and final book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, and it was something. This video will contain a spoiler section, but I always give advanced warning before heading into that territory, so no worries, you will know when to click off in advance. An initial impression of the beginning of the book was that I was surprised that we actually went back in time. I figured that we were going to pick up where we left off at the end of the Dark Forest, where we have this chokehold on the Tri-Solarans. Humanity has bested them. Rah rah humanity. But we don't. The intro was then automatically more engaging and flowed a lot better than anything I experienced in the Dark Forest. I wanted so badly while reading this book for the Dark Forest to be the lowest rated of the three books because I absolutely love the three-body problem. The Dark Forest was a 3.5 star, which kind of killed me inside. I did not want this to be any lower than that because I felt like that would be a devastating end for the series. But I really did enjoy this book a lot more, despite the fact that it was also significantly longer, and I'm going to get in obviously to my rating a little bit later. I did think it was fun that we also saw the return of an important character from the second book, and I thought that that was a nice touch. After reading this, I truly believe that the reason why the Dark Forest was such an off-reading experience for me was because it was the only one of the three books that was translated by a different person. The Three-Body Problem and Death's End were both translated by Cixin Liu, and therefore they shared a lot of similarities in tone, and I think that that was a big contributing factor to the way that I felt about all three books. Especially in the first half of Death's End, I was really appreciative of the fact that the info dumps were punctuated by these short, easily digestible chapters that were narrated by an unknown person who obviously gets revealed later, and they give us additional context to things that are significant in the story. But as we start moving into the second half of the story, the chapters progressively get longer and we are forced to contend with more information being given to us at once, with less breaks and less dialogue. I don't want to say that the second half of the book was boring because it wasn't by any means, but there are definitely some pretty significant sections, and I mean like 200 to 250 pages, where things slow way down. They don't come to a screeching halt. Things are always moving, but it's just less engaging. It's more mentally taxing to have to read. I didn't find it to be as fun. When you're looking at a book that is, in my case, 721 pages, 200 to 250 pages is not the lion's share of the story, but that is a pretty significant amount. It just lost that smoothly flowing quality that I felt that the first half of the story succeeded with so well. One of the things I really liked about the book was the fact that Cixin Liu brought back the excitement of the mysterious. In the first novel, the big mystery is how the Tri-Solarans seem to be manipulating the universe around them and how they are impacting the human ability to understand the laws of physics, which is really fun, in addition to just learning about who the hell they are in the first place. The second story revolves more around what the humans are thinking, what we are planning to do in response to the Tri-Solaran threat with the Wallfacer program. So the mystery is, what are the Wallfacers actually thinking? In this story, we are looking much broader at the greater universe as a whole, outside of ourselves and outside of even the Tri-Solarans, which is something that I really wanted from this book, and I definitely got it. This is a dense story with a pretty good grasp of existential dread. There were a couple times I just felt in my bones this intense sense of foreboding. There is a lot going on here, as the book covers the longest stretch of time of any of the three books, and I would also go so far as to say that it is the wildest in terms of concepts of the three as well. Each book is kind of escalating things until we get to the fever pitch of crazy that is the Death's End ride. And some people might disagree with this opinion, but I think that this is the most technically advanced of the three books and reminded me in certain parts of Seven Eves by Neil Stephenson, which, if you know how I feel about that book, isn't necessarily an insult, but it's not really a compliment either. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I personally was able to follow the concepts with relative ease, but I would never recommend the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy as somebody's first foray into sci-fi. It would be nearly incomprehensible for the uninitiated unless they were fully willing to do some of their own outside research. Dialogue is not Cixin Liu's strong point, and neither is writing from an emotional perspective. There are many traumatic things that happen to the human race over the course of this story, and while I did feel that sense of dread that I mentioned earlier, I did not have an emotional connection with any of the characters. Cixin Liu is a big concept guy. He's not an interpersonal writer. He is more focused on how the characters are going to react to certain situations than how they are feeling about said situations. His characters are some of the shallowest that I have ever read, and that's true for all 3 novels. But if you've made it this far into the series, then you know that that's not news, because that's the biggest complaint people have about his characters. Fans are going to be willing to look past that because of the interesting concepts that are presented here, and again, I don't have to tell you that if you have actually read up to the 3rd book. For my non-spoiler opinion of the ending, I will say that I needed a minute after finishing this because it made my brain feel like the filling of a grilled cheese. I still can't tell you whether I liked it or not. It was one of those endings where I was just along for the ride and was like, oh, I guess we're going there. Okay. It wasn't what I expected, and I didn't hate it, but damn was it weird. 4 stars. My undefeated favorite is still the 3-body problem, which is an unpopular opinion, and I'm fine with that. The 3 stories are valued for different reasons by different people. I love the simplicity of the first novel and all of the callbacks to classic science fiction. And that is it for the non-spoiler section. We are now heading into spoiler territory, so if you need to click off now, I would recommend that you do so, and thank you very much for watching. For those of you who want to hear the spoiler section, we're heading in 3, 2, 1. And if you are still here, I can assume that you have either already read Death's End or you just don't give a damn about spoilers, but either way, here we go. I briefly want to talk about the 2 things in the book that I actually called. The first was that they put Yu Taiming's brain in a jar and shot it into space. A brain in a jar, to me, for whatever reason, screams classic science fiction, and I absolutely called that. The other is the obvious meetup between Yu Taiming and Chang Xin at their star. It was pretty clear that they were going to have to meet up there at some point in the future. It was just a matter of how it was that they were going to get there. The fact that Chang Xin and Yu Taiming were robbed of meeting up with each other again after hundreds of years of waiting is something that I am absolutely not in any way bitter about at all. I truly thought that that was so shitty. That was the aspect of the end of this book that made me the most angry, I won't lie. It wasn't the collapse of the solar system into 2-dimensional space, which is a cool idea. It wasn't the odd and lonely journey in a pocket dimension outside of time, which is less cool and definitely very weird. It was the fact that the one truly emotional moment that he could have had with these characters, he stepped on. He grounded into the dirt. He said, "Too bad, so sad." And I fucking hated that. I did like the reveal that Chang Xin was the mysterious voice that has been providing us additional context throughout the story. Though potentially controversially, while I did like Chang Xin more as our main character, much more than Luo Ji from the Dark Forest, I didn't really like her as a person overall. And I understand that the point of the book is supposed to be that she is the best of us. She is the gentle heart. She is full of compassion and empathy. She is supposed to represent what humanity could be, not just trying to conquer everything in their path and always be about themselves, but looking out for her fellow man and just being a good, decent person. I get that. But I also recognize, as well as she recognized, that her choices doomed people twice. And you might say, well, Alex, she didn't realize that her choices were going to lead to those consequences. And I would say, at least in one case, that that is not true. When she was given the responsibility of the sword holder, it was passed on to her after all of these years that Luo Qi had held on to it. He had kept the Trisolarans at bay. It was very obvious that his actions and his personality were the only reason that they were not attacking Earth. The second that she was given that bit of power, the Trisolarans immediately start to attack. And instead of recognizing she's too soft, they looked at her as a weakness and knew that they could take advantage of her because she wasn't going to do anything. Instead of proving them wrong and pushing that button and sending out the message about where the location of the Trisolarans are, she did absolutely nothing, and she doomed humanity to being moved to Australia, and many people died. And many, many more people would have suffered long term if the Trisolarans had actually succeeded and made it to Earth and colonized everything, and eventually the human race would have just died out because the Trisolarans hated humans. It was so obvious that they hated humans. Their original point of coming to Earth was to conquer us. And all of that suffering and all of that pain and the giant moving and relocating of people to Australia was her fault. And she felt so much guilt about it that she ended up going blind. And when presented with an opportunity for the human race to advance and go at the speed of light and be able to get out of the solar system and protect themselves, instead of looking at her past mistake and going, you know, the last time I made one of these big decisions, it was a bad choice, she just decides to make a choice again. And it was the wrong one. And she's the reason that all of the people in the solar system died. I really just can't like her as a character. And if you thought that she was amazing and that she was doing the best that she could and she made all the decisions to the best of her ability, I think that's fantastic. I'm glad that you really liked Cixin as a person. I did not. I lost a lot of respect for her after the whole sword holder blunder, and I don't know why anybody at all in the book listened to her after that. And I honestly think it's just because of her connection to Yu Taiming, and it's because she also owned a very prominent company. But when she made that deal with Wade, that he was going to wake her up if she ever needed to make a decision about humanity, I thought that that was absolute bullshit, because Wade is not in his character to do that. He was a cold, heartless, ruthless man who would do anything to advance. That was his whole motto: advance at all cost. I mean, after all, he was the only character that the Trisolarans said that they were completely terrified of, because he was 100% willing to absolutely just decimate both the Trisolarans and the human population at a moment's notice. I mean, he was a sociopath. We all know it. And he was also the only man who seemed to be able to get anything done. I also have a nitpick with the way that Cixin's hibernation was handled, because she obviously wasn't out of hibernation but 4 years out of all of these years that pass. She's only out of hibernation for 4 of them. So by the time that the story ends, she's still in her 30s while everybody else has either aged or died. So she hasn't really gotten the time to mature as a person or experience all that life has to offer to make her a wiser character. Okay, so that's one thing. Every time that she wakes up in a new era, we are forced to listen to massive info dumps about the new era that they're living in, and about the people and how they view the world and what society is like now. And then we basically just throw her back into hibernation and we move on to the next era. And that happens multiple times, and I personally find that kind of thing pretty boring. That's where the connection to Seven Eves came in, is we were just getting these walls and walls of text about all of the new technology that's available and the way that society is running, and then stick her back in the pod and go somewhere else. And again, overall, I liked this story, so I'm gonna start talking again about some things that I actually liked about the book. We're kind of doing like a compliment sandwich thing here. I really like the interdimensional stuff. It overall was pretty easy for me to conceptualize, because when I was in high school, I was forced to read a book called Flatland, which I would not recommend to anybody. But one thing that that book does really well is it helps you to understand how a three-dimensional being sees a two-dimensional being, and how a two-dimensional being sees a three-dimensional being, and therefore how a three-dimensional being may end up looking at a fourth-dimensional being, or even beings higher up than that. And for whatever reason, that book has always stuck with me. The reason I wouldn't recommend it to people is because there's like some weird socio-political things that are going on in there, like a lot of social commentary that just completely gets in the way of all of the cool science stuff, but I remember it. I don't know whether other people found the way that Cixin Liu talked about these different dimensions to be difficult, because he wasn't exactly always the most coherent, but I really loved this idea of the universe just progressively being collapsed down into lower and lower dimensionality. Over time, different civilizations and species and races have been able to thrive in these lower dimensions, and they go and interact with a higher dimension. They're like, oh, I didn't know that beings of higher dimensions could have existed, because over time they all die out. And it opens up this idea that a two-dimensional being could eventually stumble across the remains of a three-dimensional society, and the questions that they might ask about us, and that type of thing is just incredibly cool. and I love the concept of that. And the way that the story ends about saying that, hey, eventually the universe is going to collapse down into the first dimension, and eventually we'll kind of do a rebound and a reset, and we might even get 10 dimensions again when the universe recreates itself, was just kind of mind-boggling to me. That's the part of the story that made my brain feel like the inside of a grilled cheese. The one aspect of Cixin Liu's writing in this book in particular that keeps it in the fantastical, it makes it really hard to immerse myself and conceptualize this as an actual future, is the fact that for him, there is only one answer to any particular problem. Throughout the story, we learn of all of these different barriers that humanity is constantly coming up against, and then we end up figuring out that every other advanced civilization has already come across these barriers and has surpassed them, and they all surpass them in the exact same way. Because if they don't go that one route, they eventually will die off. And I don't think that that's realistic. I think that different organisms are going to come up with different solutions to the same problem, and both of them could end up being viable. So why is it that everybody has to come to only one conclusion and that's it? I definitely don't think that every sci-fi book needs to be like Star Trek, where there's this giant harmonious galactic civilization where all these alien races live in harmony. I actually think it's really cool that Cixin Liu decided to take the exact opposite view, that in his universe it is cold, terrifying, calculating, and you have to assume that everybody wants to murder you, so you need to murder them first. Definitely not a universe that I want to live in, but conceptually it's very well thought out. And that's really what I want to leave you with, is that Cixin Liu really truly thought about all of the different aspects of this story, and he just had it planned. If you asked a question, he answered it, and that was true for all three books. That's one of the reasons why I like his writing, and despite my feelings about the second novel or any criticisms that I might have about the series as a whole, I would still recommend them to people. Again, not to first-time sci-fi readers, but to seasoned veterans of the genre, absolutely. I would just give them probably a little bit of warning about what they were going to expect, and the writing style that he has and how it might not appeal to everybody, but that's the reason why I decided to give this story 4 stars. It's solid, it's competent, and I don't have to like the main character in order for a book to be good. Anyway, these are my final thoughts about Death's End, so please let me know down in the comments whether you read this story and what you thought about it. Do you think any of my criticisms are valid, or do you think that it's a pretty wholly spectacular and incredible story? Was this one your favorite, or was one of the other books your favorite? Do let me know. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.